The morning of October 24, 1942, on Guadalcanal, Sergeant John Basilone stood behind his Browning M1917 machine gun and watched the jungle tree line, 200 yards distant. His hands rested on the weapon's brass water jacket, still cool in the pre-dawn darkness. The gun weighed 93 pounds with its tripod. His assistant gunners had complained about hauling it through the mud from Henderson Field. They had cursed its weight during every step of the approach march. They had questioned why the Marine Corps insisted on such a heavy weapon when the enemy carried lighter machine guns that could be moved by a single man. In approximately 8 hours, Basilone would understand exactly why. The weapon they called too heavy, too cumbersome, too difficult to move, would become the only thing standing between his position and total collapse. But in that moment before dawn, before the Japanese assault began, the question hanging over every machine gun position on Guadalcanal was the same question that had plagued American automatic weapons doctrine since the Great War. How much gun does an infantryman need? If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Browning M1917 was not designed for the Pacific War. It was not designed for jungle fighting or island hopping or the kind of desperate defensive actions that would characterize the Marine Corps experience in 1942. It was designed in 1917 by John Moses Browning as a water-cooled, belt-fed, sustained-fire weapon meant for the trench warfare of the Western Front. The gun fired 30-caliber rifle cartridges at a rate of 450 rounds per minute. It could maintain that rate indefinitely as long as gunners kept the water jacket filled and ammunition belts fed into the action. The weapon was heavy because it was built to last. The barrel was surrounded by a brass or steel water jacket holding approximately 7 pints of water. As the gun fired, the barrel heated rapidly. The water absorbed this heat, preventing barrel warpage and maintaining accuracy during sustained fire. When the water began to boil, steam escaped through a valve, and gunners would refill the jacket from canteens or any available water source. The tripod weighed 53 pounds alone, constructed of steel with adjustable legs for uneven terrain. The gun itself weighed 41 pounds with water. Ammunition came in cloth belts, each belt holding 250 rounds and weighing approximately 7 pounds when loaded. American machine gun doctrine in 1942 was built on lessons learned at terrible cost during the Great War. The Army and Marine Corps had watched German MG-8 machine guns decimate attacking infantry across no man's land. They had seen what sustained, accurate automatic fire could accomplish against massed troops. They had learned that machine guns were not merely rapid-fire rifles, but weapons of area denial, capable of holding entire sectors against numerically superior forces. The official doctrine stated that the machine gun was a defensive weapon first, designed to cover avenues of approach and break up enemy attacks before they reached friendly lines. Each gun was assigned a primary sector of fire and alternate sectors. Gun crews trained to fire predetermined patterns, sweeping left to right across likely enemy assembly areas. They practiced ammunition discipline, firing in bursts of 6 to 9 rounds rather than continuous streams, conserving ammunition while maintaining suppressive effect. The doctrine emphasized reliability over portability. A machine gun that could fire continuously for hours was worth more than a lighter weapon that would fail after sustained use. The M1917 had been tested at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, where ordnance personnel fired continuous bursts totaling 21,000 rounds without mechanical failure. The barrel remained accurate. The mechanism continued functioning. Only the water in the cooling jacket needed periodic replacement. This was the weapon Marine gun crews carried into the Pacific, and this was the weapon they complained about. The weight was brutal in tropical conditions. Moving a gun position required multiple men. The tripod alone needed 2 Marines to carry it any distance. The gun itself needed another 2. Ammunition bearers followed with belts of cartridges, each man carrying as many as he could manage in the heat and humidity. Training reports from Camp Lejeune and Camp Pendleton in 1941 and early 1942 documented consistent complaints from infantry battalions about the M1917's weight. Rifle company commanders requested lighter automatic weapons for their machine gun platoons. They pointed to the Browning automatic rifle, the BAR, which weighed only 19 pounds and could be carried and operated by a single man. They noted that the enemy's Type 96 light machine gun weighed only 20 pounds and could be moved quickly during fluid combat situations. The arguments had merit. In jungle terrain, where visibility was measured in yards rather than hundreds of yards, where trails were narrow and movement was slow, the heavy machine gun seemed poorly suited. Officers questioned whether the sustained fire capability mattered when engagements were typically brief, violent encounters at close range. They wondered if the Marine Corps was preparing to fight the last war rather than the current one. Marine Corps leadership held firm on doctrine. The Commandant's office issued guidance that emphasized the importance of sustained fire capability in defensive operations. They acknowledged the weight penalty but insisted the M1917's reliability and firepower justified the burden. Each infantry battalion would maintain its allocation of heavy machine guns, regardless of environmental challenges. Some battalions requested the Browning M1917A4, an air-cooled version of the M1917 that eliminated the water jacket and reduced weight to 31 pounds. The M1919A4 was lighter and more portable, but it sacrificed sustained fire capability. Without water cooling, the barrel would overheat after several hundred rounds of continuous fire, requiring barrel changes that interrupted fire and exposed gun crews during critical moments. The request was denied for frontline infantry units. The M1917 would remain standard. John Basilone's machine gun section occupied positions on the southern perimeter of Henderson Field, the critical airstrip that American forces had seized from the Japanese in August. The field was barely functional, a muddy strip carved from jungle and coral, but it was the only American airfield in the Solomon Islands. Whoever controlled Henderson Field controlled the air over Guadalcanal. The Japanese knew this. They intended to take it back. Basilone commanded 2 machine gun squads, each with an M1917 Browning. His guns covered the likely approaches through the jungle toward the airfield. The positions had been dug during previous weeks, foxholes and gun pits connected by shallow communication trenches. Ammunition was stacked in sheltered positions behind each gun. Water cans sat nearby for refilling the cooling jackets. Fields of fire had been cleared, cutting vegetation to provide unobstructed views of the approaches. The Marine defenders on Guadalcanal in October 1942 were not fresh troops with full equipment and ample supplies. They had been on the island for 2 months, fighting in conditions that defied imagination. Malaria infected more than half the force. Dysentery was endemic. Food supplies were limited to captured Japanese rice and whatever could be brought in by ships that ran the Japanese naval blockade. Ammunition was rationed carefully. Artillery shells were counted, individually. Machine gun ammunition was precious. Each M1917 position had approximately 3,000 rounds immediately available, stored in ammunition cans that held 250-round belts. Additional ammunition was cached in company supply points, but bringing it forward during combat would be difficult or impossible. What each gun crew had in their immediate position was what they would fight with. No resupply during action could be guaranteed. Intelligence reports indicated the Japanese were preparing a major assault. Radio intercepts suggested significant troop movements. Coast watchers on nearby islands reported ships moving toward Guadalcanal, carrying reinforcements. The pattern was clear. The Japanese intended to overwhelm Henderson Field with a large-scale infantry attack, possibly supported by armor and artillery. Marine commanders positioned their limited forces to cover the most likely avenues of approach. The perimeter was thin, stretched to cover too much, ground with too few men. Machine guns were the backbone of the defense. Each gun position was expected to hold its sector regardless of enemy pressure. There was no reserve to commit if positions failed. Every Marine on the line understood this calculation. The Browning M1917's operational characteristics were precisely documented in technical manuals issued by the Ordnance Department. The weapon fired the .30-06 Springfield cartridge, the same round used in the M1903 Springfield rifle and the M1 Garand. The cartridge propelled a 150-grain bullet at 2,800 feet per second, delivering 2,700 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. The gun's mechanism was recoil-operated. When a round fired, the barrel and bolt recoiled together for a short distance. As they moved rearward, the bolt rotated and unlocked from the barrel. The barrel stopped moving and returned to battery while the bolt continued rearward, extracting the spent cartridge case and ejecting it. A recoil spring then drove the bolt forward, stripping a fresh cartridge from the ammunition belt, chambering it, and locking into battery. The cycle repeated as long as the trigger was held and ammunition was available. The rate of fire was controlled by the recoil system's design, approximately 450 rounds per minute under ideal conditions. In practice, gunners fired in bursts rather than continuous streams. A trained crew would fire 6 to 9 round bursts, approximately 1 second of trigger pressure, then release. This pattern conserved ammunition and improved accuracy while maintaining suppressive effect on target areas. The water cooling system was critical to sustained fire capability. As the barrel heated during firing, heat transferred to the water in the surrounding jacket. Water has high specific heat capacity, meaning it can absorb significant thermal energy before its temperature rises substantially. As firing continued, the water temperature would increase until it began to boil. Steam would escape through a valve on top of the water jacket. Gunners would monitor the steam output and refill the jacket when water levels dropped. In tropical conditions on Guadalcanal, where ambient temperatures exceeded 90 degrees Fahrenheit and humidity approached saturation, the cooling system worked harder. The water started warmer and reached boiling temperature more quickly. Gun crews learned to keep multiple canteens filled specifically for the cooling jacket, separate from drinking water. Some crews used captured Japanese canteens in addition to American issue. Water became as important as ammunition. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The ammunition expenditure calculation was straightforward mathematics that every machine gun section leader understood. 450 rounds per minute meant a gun could fire all 250 rounds in a standard belt in approximately 33 seconds of continuous fire. In practice, firing in controlled bursts, a belt might last 2 to 3 minutes of active engagement. 3,000 rounds, the standard allocation for a defensive position, represented 12 belts. 12 belts meant perhaps 30 minutes of sustained combat at typical engagement rates. The Japanese assault began after nightfall on October 24, 1942. Intelligence estimates later confirmed that approximately 3,000 Japanese infantry from the 2nd Sendai Division participated in the attack, supported by elements of the 16th and 29th Infantry regiments. The assault was coordinated with naval bombardment from Japanese warships offshore and artillery fire from positions in the hills south of Henderson Field. The bombardment started at approximately 2100 hours. Shells crashed into the marine perimeter, targeting known defensive positions. The Japanese had aerial photographs of Henderson Field from reconnaissance flights. They knew where the Marines had placed their defenses. Artillery fire concentrated on machine gun positions and command posts. Basilone's gun crews took cover during the bombardment, sheltering in foxholes adjacent to the gun pits. The M1917 remained in position, too heavy to move quickly and too valuable to abandon. Ammunition cans were covered with ponchos to protect against shrapnel and dirt. When the shelling lifted, gun crews would return to their weapons and prepare to engage. The bombardment lasted approximately 40 minutes. When it stopped, the sudden silence was broken by sounds from the jungle. Movement. Many men moving through vegetation. Japanese infantry advancing toward the Marine lines in the darkness. Flares went up from Marine positions, magnesium light casting harsh shadows across the cleared ground in front of the perimeter. The Japanese came, in waves. Not the organized assault formations shown in training manuals, but masses of infantry moving forward together, seeking to overwhelm defensive positions through sheer numbers. They carried rifles, light machine guns, grenades, and sword bayonets. Many were shouting, the traditional banzai charge meant to terrify defenders and build attacking momentum. Basilone returned to his primary gun position. His assistant gunner was already there, feeding the first ammunition belt into the weapon. The water jacket was full. The tripod was stable. The gun was laid on its primary sector, covering the approach trail from the south. Basilone settled behind the gun, gripped the spade handles, thumbed the safety off, and acquired his first targets in the flickering light of falling flares. Then he pressed the trigger. The Browning M1917 began firing at a cyclic rate of 450 rounds per minute. Basilone fired in controlled bursts, 6 to 9 rounds each, traversing left to right, across his assigned sector. The gun's mechanism functioned exactly as designed. Each round chambered, fired, extracted, and ejected with mechanical precision. Brass cartridge cases piled up on the right side of the gun, glinting in the flare light. The Japanese infantry kept coming. They moved through the initial bursts of fire, stepping over fallen comrades, pressing forward toward the Marine positions. Basilone's assistant gunner fed ammunition belts continuously, ensuring the gun never ran empty. The first belt, 250 rounds, was expended in approximately 3 minutes of engagement. The second belt went into the gun immediately. The water in the cooling jacket began to heat. Within 5 minutes of sustained firing, steam was visible from the valve on top of the water jacket. The assistant gunner used a canteen to add water, pouring it into the fill port while Basilone continued firing. The barrel remained cool enough to maintain accuracy. The mechanism showed no signs of stress or malfunction. Japanese infantry reached within 50 yards of Basilone's position, close enough to see individual faces in the flare light, close enough to hear their shouting over the sound of gunfire. Basilone adjusted his aim, lowering the muzzle slightly to engage targets at closer range. The gun continued firing. Bodies fell in rows across the cleared ground. The assault began to waver as casualties mounted, but the Japanese commanders committed more troops. Fresh waves emerged from the jungle, stepping over the fallen, maintaining pressure on the Marine lines. Adjacent positions reported being overwhelmed. Japanese infantry penetrated the perimeter in several locations. The defense was fracturing. Basilone's gun position became increasingly isolated as neighboring positions were overrun or forced to withdraw. The gun kept firing. The third ammunition belt went through the weapon, then the fourth, then the fifth. Basilone's hands worked the traverse and elevation controls, shifting fire to engage new threats as they appeared. His assistant gunners worked frantically to keep ammunition feeding into the gun and water in the cooling jacket. The pile of spent brass beside the gun grew larger. At some point during the engagement, the exact timing lost in the chaos of combat, Basilone's assistant gunner was killed by rifle fire from Japanese infantry who had flanked the position. Another Marine crawled forward to take his place, feeding belts and maintaining the water jacket. That Marine was wounded minutes later. Another took his position. The gun continued firing. The M1917 Browning was designed to be operated by a crew of at least 3 men for extended periods. One man served as gunner, controlling the weapon and directing fire. One man served as assistant gunner, feeding ammunition and maintaining the cooling system. Additional men served as ammunition bearers, bringing forward fresh belts from supply points and carrying away empty ammunition, cans. John Basilone, after his assistant gunners were killed or wounded, operated the gun alone for extended periods during the October 24th engagement. He controlled the weapon with his left hand on the traverse mechanism and his right hand on the trigger. He fed ammunition belts with his right hand when belts ran out, a difficult task requiring him to reach across the gun while maintaining awareness of targets in his sector. He added water to the cooling jacket during brief pauses in firing. The physical demands were extraordinary. The gun's recoil, while dampened by the weapon's mass and the water jacket's weight, still produced significant vibration and impact against the gunner's body. The spade grip handles transmitted this force directly to Basilone's hands and arms. After thousands of rounds, the cumulative effect was severe. His hands were blistered from gripping the hot metal handles. His arms ached from controlling the gun's traverse. His shoulders hurt from the constant vibration. The heat from the weapon was intense despite the water cooling system. The barrel, though surrounded by water, radiated heat. The receiver, containing the bolt and firing mechanism, became hot to the touch. The ammunition belts themselves grew warm from lying near the gun during sustained firing. Basilone's face and hands were exposed to this heat continuously throughout the engagement. The noise was damaging. 450 rounds per minute created a continuous roar that exceeded safe hearing thresholds. The muzzle blast, repeated thousands of times over hours of fighting, caused temporary and permanent hearing damage. Basilone would suffer hearing loss for the rest of his life, a common consequence for machine gunners of that era who fought without hearing protection. The ammunition expenditure during Basilone's defensive action was documented in after-action reports compiled by the 1st Marine Division. His gun positions fired approximately 26,000 rounds during the engagement that lasted from approximately 2100 hours on October 24th until dawn on October 25th. 26,000 rounds represented more than 100 ammunition belts. The weight of that ammunition alone exceeded 1,800 pounds. Japanese casualty figures from the October offensive on Guadalcanal remain disputed, with American estimates significantly higher than Japanese records acknowledge. What is documented without dispute is that Basilone's sector held. The Japanese assault in his area was stopped. Bodies were counted in front of his gun positions the following morning. The number varied by report, but multiple sources documented at least 38 Japanese dead directly attributable to Basilone's fire, with many more wounded who withdrew or died elsewhere. The morning of October 25th revealed the cost of the night's fighting. Basilone's gun position was surrounded by expended brass, cartridge cases, thousands of them, covering the ground in a brass carpet that glinted in the dawn light. The gun itself showed the effects of sustained use. The barrel, though still functional, had fired far beyond normal service life expectations. The water jacket was nearly empty, most of the water having boiled away despite repeated refilling during the night. The complaints about the M1917's weight disappeared from official correspondence after Guadalcanal. Reports from battalion commanders no longer requested lighter automatic weapons for defensive positions. The doctrine of sustained fire, which had seemed outdated in the jungle fighting of the Pacific, was vindicated by the reality of what happened when prepared positions with heavy machine guns faced massed infantry assault. John Basilone was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions on October 24 and 25, 1942. The citation specifically mentioned his defense of a critical position against overwhelming enemy forces and his continued operation of machine guns after other crew members were killed or wounded. He became the first enlisted Marine to receive the Medal of Honor in World War II. The weapon he used, the Browning M1917 that gun crews had complained about carrying through Guadalcanal's jungles, became the standard against which all subsequent machine gun designs would be measured. Its weight, which had seemed excessive in training, proved essential during sustained combat. The gun that could fire 26,000 rounds in a single engagement without mechanical failure justified every pound of steel and water that made it so heavy to carry. After Guadalcanal, Basilone was brought back to the United States for a war bond tour. The Marine Corps used his story to illustrate the importance of proper equipment and training. He appeared at rallies and gave speeches, though he was uncomfortable with the attention. In 1944, he requested return to combat, duty. The request was initially denied given his value as a symbol for recruiting and bond sales, but Basilone insisted. He was eventually assigned to the 5th Marine Division. On February 19, 1945, Basilone landed with the 27th Marine Regiment on Iwo Jima. He was killed during the assault on the first day, leading his machine gun section against Japanese fortifications. He was 30 years old. He had survived Guadalcanal, survived the night when he proved that the weapon everyone called too heavy was exactly heavy enough, only to die on another volcanic island in another desperate battle. The M1917 Browning remained in service with American forces through the Korean War. The weapon saw limited use in Vietnam, primarily by South Vietnamese forces using older American equipment. The gun that John Basilone fired on Guadalcanal, serial number unknown, was likely destroyed or lost in subsequent fighting. But examples of the M1917 exist in museums and collections, preserved as examples of the weapon that defined American machine gun doctrine for 3 decades. The fundamental question that preceded Guadalcanal, whether sustained fire capability justified the weight penalty of water-cooled weapons, was answered definitively on October 24, 1942. The answer came not from doctrine committees or testing boards, but from the reality of combat. When Marines needed a gun that could fire continuously for hours without failure, the M1917 performed exactly as designed. Its weight, far from being a liability, was the physical manifestation of engineering decisions that prioritized reliability and sustained fire over portability. The Japanese assault on Henderson Field failed. The Americans held the airfield. B-17 bombers and fighter aircraft continued operating from the muddy strip, providing air support that proved decisive in the campaign for Guadalcanal. The island was secured by February 1943, the strategic importance of that victory, enabling American advance through the Solomon Islands toward Rabaul and eventually toward the Philippines, began with defensive actions like Basilone's that prevented Japanese forces from recapturing Henderson Field during critical moments. For the Marines who fought on Guadalcanal and subsequent Pacific Islands, the lesson was clear and personal. The weapon you complain about carrying might be the weapon that saves your life. The 93 pounds of steel, water, and brass that seemed excessive during training marches became exactly the right amount of gun when facing 3,000 enemy infantry in the darkness. The doctrine that emphasized sustained fire over portability, defensive capability over offensive mobility, proved correct when tested under the worst possible conditions. John Basilone understood this truth in a way that transcended doctrine and theory. He lived it for 8 hours on a ridgeline on Guadalcanal, feeding belt after belt into a gun that never stopped firing, watching the weapon perform exactly as promised while everything around him descended into chaos. The gun they called too heavy kept firing when lighter weapons would have failed. It held the line when the line could not afford to break, and in doing so, it justified every ounce of its weight and every complaint that gun crews had made about carrying it through the jungle. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.